I figure it's about time you knew something really important about me. I'm an Elton John fan. I mean, like a big fan. I have followed him throughout my life. He has sung the songs that are the soundtrack to my life, and I have read just about everything I can grab my hands on that has to do with Elton John. I'm actually surprised I haven't mentioned him in a sermon yet after, 8 months already? Well, today's the day. I bring him up because he's a wealthy man. He's a wealthy man. He is worth $500 million. He has homes in Windsor, London, Venice, Atlanta, Beverly Hills. His Beverly Hills home alone is worth $32 million. He's been known to have florists create up to 240 floral arrangements each day for his homes. He has over 250,000 sunglasses in his collection. That probably doesn't surprise you. He has an extensive art collection. He has owned at one point a pink Rolls Royce and a $26 million 164-foot yacht. That's wealthy. Giovanni de Pietro de Bernardone came from a wealthy family, but wealth looked different at that time. Giovanni was born in the year 1181. His father was a textile merchant, and he was very successful. His father took to calling him Francesco, which means the Frenchman, because his father really loved France, probably because of his commercial success there. Francis was spoiled as a young child. His parents indulged him in everything. He was skilled at archery and wrestling and horse riding, horsemanship. He delighted in fine clothes. He loved troubadours. In fact, he is said to have outshone all of his friends in triviality. We don't know if the woman in our scripture reading today was wealthy before her husband died. We don't know if she, had at least what was considered wealth in that day. I know it looked different in the 12th century or the 21st century. But whether or not she isn't anymore. All we know is that she appeared at the temple treasury and put in 2 small copper coins. Francis was supposed to have followed his father into the silk and textile industry, but he thought he would become a knight instead. And so he signed up for a military campaign that was happening, and yet he didn't get the glory of being a knight. In fact, he was captured, and his captors, rather than killing him like they did most, they saw him dressed in aristocratic clothing and very fine armor, and so they thought he might be worth a ransom. They put him in prison for almost a year until his father paid the ransom. During that time, Francis had a lot of time to think, and it was beginning to change him. When he finally returned home, the story goes that he was out riding his horse in the countryside, and he came across a leper. And in that moment, he thought of Matthew 25, the one where Jesus was to be found in those who are hungry or imprisoned or sick. And so Francis, rather than going the other way, he jumped off his horse and he embraced the leper and kissed him on the lips. Legend says that he described the experience as a feeling of sweetness on his mouth. In 1984, Elton John was singing "Don't Go Breaking My Heart." I'm not going to sing it for you, at least there's that. He was singing and he was feeding his cocaine habit. And in 1984, while Elton John was doing that, the teenager Ryan White was being discriminated against, threatened, because he had AIDS. He had contracted it through a blood transfusion. Elton John had heard about the situation with Ryan White and his family, and he wanted to do something nice, so he arranged for an adventure. He purchased for them opportunities to have a private tour of Disneyland with the limos and the jet plane and all of that. Elton also gave him tickets to one of his concerts. He met the family then, Elton John did, and he became aware of their deep Christian faith. They became friends, and Elton John was at Ryan White's bedside in 1990 when he died. Watching Ryan White die for no reason of his own, of course, no fault of his, Elton John began to take assessment of his own life. He is quoted of saying, "I had all the money in the world, but it didn't matter because I wasn't well." Elton John went into rehab and has been sober ever since. The widow didn't have to give anything to the temple treasury. It wasn't required in the Jewish law for people who were poor to give. She didn't have to give her 2 copper coins. It's not like it was going to make a huge difference. It's the smallest coinage in the Roman Empire, the smallest value. It was only 1/64 of the typical laborer's wages for one day. She didn't have to give, but she did. She gave all that she had to live on. Why does anyone give? Honor, guilt, priorities, inspiration, obedience, gratitude. After Ryan White's death, Elton John formed the Elton John AIDS Foundation. He wanted to work towards eradicating the disease and to solve, or at least put some salve on people's suffering. Since 1990 and the inception of the Elton John AIDS Foundation, he has raised over $400 million and has helped, last year alone, 1.8 million individuals with direct support. What is valuable? Hiring troubadours? 250,000 pairs of sunglasses? Having a friendship with someone who touches your heart? And finding purpose in eliminating a disease? Maybe seeing Jesus in the leper and going to the temple where you can feel God's presence when you don't have much of anything else anymore. Francis no longer enjoyed the things he and his friends used to do, and so he set off to find out what was next, and he took a pilgrimage to Rome, and he was praying in a church, and he heard God's voice say, "Rebuild the church." After time, he understood what that meant for him. It included leaving his former life completely. In fact, he renounced everything, including the inheritance from his father. Legend says that he stripped himself naked as a symbol of his complete renunciation of everything he had. And later he would write about his relationship with Lady Poverty. Someone, he would write, saying, knew the paradoxes of the gospel, those things like strength and weakness, richness and poverty, and life and death. Francis gave up everything. And the widow gave all that she had. I don't have $500 million like Elton John, nor do I have just 2 small copper coins. I fall somewhere in the middle. I think most of us fall somewhere in the middle. But that middle is changing. It's shifting in these days of the pandemic. 28 million claims have been filed for unemployment benefits. And most of those who are struggling to make ends meet are people whose skin are brown and black. And it doesn't look like there's going to be another stimulus package. Meanwhile, the stock market is doing okay. I'm really grateful for the efforts that were put in place at the start of the pandemic, to give homes to those who are experiencing homelessness and to keep people in the homes that they have. It's amazing what we can do when we set our priorities towards things like that. Do you remember when the pandemic first began and the roads were empty? Do you remember what it looked like when the sky was just a little bit clearer and the beaches a little cleaner, the water a little clearer? And the animals began to roam. Remember those headlines? A puma was walking the streets of Santiago. A red fox and her kits found a home under a bridge in Toronto. And sea lions began taking over an Argentinian port. Francis was in love with creation. Francis was known to have preached to the birds, and they are said to have listened. There's a story that Francis came across a rabbit who was caught in a trap and gently released the rabbit, and as he went on his way, advised the rabbit to be more careful next time. The rabbit didn't leave Francis's side after that. And there's a story of a wolf that was really causing terror in the village nearby, that was eating the animals and threatening the people. And so the people got up in arms and began to go after the wolf, but every encounter left someone more injured by the animal. And Francis eventually set to go out to meet the wolf, and as he's roaming, he cried out, "Come to me, brother wolf. In the name of Christ, I order you not to hurt anyone anymore." And the legend has it, the wolf in that moment came out, lowered his head, and curled up at Francis's feet. What is wealth? What is wealth? Is it a good portfolio, a meaningful job, a home for everyone, a cure for a disease, a world that is just, a creation that is healthy? I still love Elton John, but he still has an addiction problem. It's not cocaine or alcohol anymore, it's shopping. And so I imagine his sunglass collection is still growing. Elton John is no saint. He's no saint. Francis embraced his poverty, and others began to join him, and he and they together created the Franciscan monastic order, and Francis became a saint. I'm somewhere in the middle, I think. The widow was praised by Jesus, although she probably didn't realize it. That's okay, because she wasn't giving to get attention, not like the scribes were doing, as Jesus pointed out. I may never know if Jesus is happy with the way I'm living my life, especially while I'm living it. I just hope he thinks I have the right priorities. What will wealth look like when we come out of this pandemic? Who will have it? How will we define it? Will we notice it? If it's right in front of us, if it's within our grasp? Maybe it always has been right here and within our grasp. We have some time to think these days. We had more time to think probably at the start of the pandemic. It's not quite a year like Francis had. But maybe it's enough time. Maybe it's enough time for us to really know what it means to be wealthy, especially in the eyes of God. I pray so.